We've announced today our charges against 3 Iranian hackers who are engaging in a malign foreign influence campaign. The charges we have laid out today and announced today lay out a years-long hacking campaign targeting current and former government officials, targeting journalists, and most recently, targeting U.S. political campaigns. As you indicated, these charges include discussion and laying out of a malicious cyber activity that the intelligence community and the FBI has previously referenced. These efforts included malicious Iranian cyber actors sending unsolicited emails to individuals then associated with the campaign of President Biden, and those emails contained stolen excerpts of stolen non-public material from the Trump campaign. I should point out, Kayleigh, that there's no indication that the recipients replied to those emails. To your question about intent, the hackers made clear in their very own words, and we've laid this out in the charging document we unsealed today, and that intent is to undermine the campaign of former President Trump in advance of the election.
And I wonder, ma'am, how you see these efforts differing or working in tandem with the efforts of other adversaries, be it Russia or China, for example. Are they working in concert, or are they all working in different ways with similar motives?
Well, look, this is part of the charges we announced today and the broader aggressive activity that we are seeing from Iran, from Russia, from China, are part of a very complex, diverse, and aggressive foreign malign influence effort that we are seeing from our adversaries in this election cycle. So the charges we've announced today, I think, are consistent with what we have been seeing and warning about. The intelligence community has been quite clear over the last weeks and months about what we are seeing in the way of foreign malign influence. You have seen the Justice Department take aggressive action in the last several weeks. We unveiled the operations of Russian actors. In the last couple of weeks, we exposed Russian foreign malign influence campaigns, again, all directed at and in an effort to sow discord, to sow mistrust, and to undermine our confidence in our election process.
Well, of course, what you're alluding to, the seizure of dozens of domains that the DOJ is alleging have been propagating Russian-backed efforts to spread foreign malign influence, including around the presidential election. I believe there was some 32 of those domains. Ma'am, how far does that web go, and what else is Russia specifically doing? Are you seeing it having an impact?
That's exactly right, Kayleigh. What we exposed a few weeks ago were Putin-directed efforts using a Russian state-operated media arm, RT, to spread Russian propaganda, to spread pro-Russian narratives, using unwitting American commentators to do so, to funnel millions of dollars to a U.S. company in order to do that. And we also exposed the work of a proxy company, again, Putin-directed, called the Social Design Agency, which is a proxy company used by Russia to push out AI-generated content, again, pushing out Russian propaganda targeting U.S. voters and specific voter demographics, all in an effort to influence the election, to undermine confidence in our election process, to undermine also, from the Russians' perspective, to undermine our support for Ukraine. So this is part of a broader scheme and efforts, very aggressive efforts, by Russian foreign malign actors.
Again, we're in conversation here with the U.S. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Obviously, ma'am, there are a number of channels and ways in which mis and disinformation that could be aimed at influencing voters can circulate in the modern age, including on social media, on platforms, for example, like X. Is the DOJ working with X and Elon Musk to try to tamp down on that mis and disinformation? And if you're trying, are you seeing cooperation on the other side?
Well, look, what we're doing is doing everything we can to investigate, to expose, and to disrupt these activities. When we see foreign malign influence activity on platforms across the United States, we are taking that information, using that information, and sharing it with platforms, including X. We are very focused on providing social media platforms information, actionable information in real time so that they can take action under their own discretion, making their own judgments consistent with the First Amendment. We are providing them information, and then they are taking action at their own discretion to address that activity that we point out to them. So we will continue to do that. Our focus is on making sure we are exposing this activity so that Americans can be discerning consumers, because, Kayleigh, American voters should be deciding our election, not our foreign adversaries.
Well, on that point, ma'am, it's one thing to put out information, be it dis or misinformation, aimed at influencing American votes. It's another thing entirely to actually try to disrupt or tamper with the electoral process itself. To what extent is the Department of Justice concerned about potential cyber or even physical disruptions to the election process, be it on Election Day in November or in the early voting leading up to it?
So two things I would say on this, Kayleigh. One, we see our foreign adversaries trying to put into their malign influence campaigns disinformation and misinformation about the vulnerability of our voting systems. Our voting systems are quite resilient, and they are quite diffuse, and they are by and large not connected, and almost a majority not connected to the internet. My colleagues at CISA over at DHS have the lead for the federal government in working to protect our critical infrastructure, and importantly, working with state and local officials to protect that infrastructure, that voting infrastructure. Remember, the voting in this country is controlled, owned, operated, and administered all at the state and local level. So our job in the federal government, working across the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, is to assist our state and local partners in that effort. We are sharing information about efforts to influence those that electoral process, but the election systems and the infrastructure themselves are very diffuse and very diffuse across the state and local jurisdictions and not connected to the internet. So people should be on the lookout for misinformation about that.
Madam Deputy Attorney General, I'd like to turn to another issue. As yesterday, the DOJ also charged 2 Russian nationals in a crypto laundering scheme. What can you tell us about how pervasive these potential laundering networks are, what their aims are, and how the DOJ is working in concert with other agencies like, say, the SEC in cracking down in this regard?
So you're quite right, Kayleigh. We took action yesterday to disrupt a number of malicious cyber criminals and to disrupt the criminal ecosystem that fuels their activity. 2 Russian nationals, and also we disrupted an illicit crypto exchange called Cryptix. This is part of our overall effort to disrupt wherever we can the criminal ecosystem that is fueling everything from ransomware to darknet drug trafficking to money laundering. And it was money laundering that was really at issue here. These are 2 Russian nationals engaged in a massive money laundering schemes that was fueling criminal activity across a whole spectrum of areas, as I said, ransomware and drug trafficking. What we are seeing is crypto, for instance, is the lifeblood of a lot of this illicit activity, including ransomware. And it may be advertised as borderless, but what we are showing, including with yesterday's charges that we brought, is that we will follow it wherever it goes, including to the darkest corners, and hold individuals to account.